24/7 Sports Director Steve Wiltfong coming to you this week with 24/7 Sports National Recruiting Editor Brandon Huffman on the Wiltfong Whiparound as we update our top 247 2022 player rankings. Brandon, let's start at the top. You have a nice story on Quinn Ewers that was unveiled today as well. He remains our #1 player in the country. What do you love about Quinn?
Well, I just think he is the complete package. And I know we talk about this a lot of times when we have quarterbacks like that, whether it's a Trevor Lawrence, whether it's a Davis Mills, a Bryce Young / DJ Uiagalelei. But then we hit a little bit of a gap where there may not have been a pure, complete, all-around quarterback package until we get to 2022 and Quinn Ewers. And, it's been interesting to just watch his development and to see the kind of player that he was as a junior, to see how he's looked on the camp circuit at the Elite 11 last week and punching a ticket to the Elite 11 finals and knowing all the pressure on him. He doesn't play like a guy who's got a lot of pressure on him. He's been the #1 player almost from the get-go. He's been the #1 quarterback almost from the get-go. And yet that hasn't seemed to affect his play on the field. And what you're seeing is him continuing to develop into that elite passing prospect that he is and that he's been rated as such. And the thing that I wrote about was, what's his biggest pathway? What's his best pathway to the starting quarterback job at Ohio State? And you look at what Ohio State's done recruiting-wise since they've lost, Dwayne Haskins a couple years ago, and then Justin Fields in this last year. Joe Burrow transferred. Ohio State's quarterback room has been full, but there's some guys there that are going to make it competitive for Quinn Ewers to take over early. But he's such an impact guy. Could we have a Kelly Bryant, Trevor Lawrence situation? That's going to be fascinating to watch, and I'm sure Ryan Day loves to have that problem.
Brandon, Quinn Ewers took South Lake Carroll to the state's Final Four as a sophomore and put up monster numbers. And he right there kind of reminded me of Bryce Young and DJ Uiagalelei, who just had 3 special seasons to end their careers in high school. And then then Quinn comes back as a junior with a hernia and takes South Lake Carroll another step to the state title game where they lose to Cade Klubnik, who's another little mini riser in these rankings, who also are in the Elite 11 invite, who's committed to Clemson. They lost to Austin Westlake in the title game. And anyway, Quinn Ewers is probably another week or two away from being back to full strength. But how does Quinn kind of compare to DJ and Bryce, who we're expecting to be breakout stars in college football as sophomores this year?
Well, I think in the case of Quinn, it's that he was expected to be elite almost from the get-go. With both Bryce and DJ, I don't want to call them late bloomers because they weren't. They were guys that we had known about well into the beginning of their high school career. But remember, DJ didn't even take over the starting job until midway through his sophomore year at St. John Bosco, took over for Real Mitchell, who had won a state championship the year before. So kind of a Trevor Lawrence and Kelly Bryant situation there at Bosco. Real Mitchell gets hurt, DJ takes over and never looks back. Bryce Young was at Cathedral High School his first 2 years. It wasn't until he took over at Mater Dei for JT Daniels his junior year when they won a state championship that we started to see the ascension of him. Whereas Quinn was a guy that was elite from the get-go. And I think he's just further along in his development as a player at the same stage as DJ and Bryce. Now, DJ and Bryce both ended up being top 2 players in the country. I think DJ was a top 10 guy, but it wasn't like he had that big jump until really junior to senior year, kind of same with Bryce, whereas Quinn Ewers kind of had that big jump early on in his high school career. So he's a guy that I think could come in and be able to play right away. Depending on what happens at Ohio State with their quarterback situation in 2021, he could be ready in 2022. Obviously, Bryce Young was ready to go in 2020, but Mac Jones had a fantastic year. DJ took over at times when Trevor Lawrence was out with COVID. He showed that he was more than capable, and I think Quinn has that ability to come in and play right away. But I just think at the same stages in their career, Quinn's kind of more that complete guy. DJ's biggest thing was really just being able to rein in the big arm and to pick up on the little things, to go through his progressions, to go through his reads. Bryce Young, really the thing that held him back was just more competition level and his size. He was never going to be a big guy, whereas Quinn, you can really drop him in any kind of offense right now, and I think he'd flourish. I just think he's better at the same stage and having a similar ascension later in his career, but he was already kind of at the top early on compared to Bryce and DJ.
Quinn Ewers, a Juvenile Ohio State class, ranked number 2 nationally, but no question, Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns still trying to stay alive for the 5-star recruit. We have a new 5-star in this class, Brandon. It's defensive tackle Gabriel Brown. Dindy. He's now our number 1 player in the state of Florida, number 4 player overall, rises 1 spot from number 5 in the previous ranking. So we've always loved him. But what do you specifically love about Gabriel Brown Dindy?
Well, I love the fact that he's got an MMA background. I think that's something that's pretty intriguing when you look at a player who's at a position where you got to be able to use your strength. You got to be able to use your quickness. You got to be able to use your hands. You got to be able to shed the blockers that are trying to keep you from the backfield. You got to be able to hand fight. You got to be able to do all of those things, have quickness, have strength, have leverage, all of that. And I think that MMA background kind of goes with that. You know, his player comp is Ed Oliver, and a player that obviously Ed Oliver was an elite player at Houston and, you know, NFL guy now. But one thing that you look at what Dindy has is that ability to just continue to get stronger. His body's not done, you know, being maxed out to where it is. I think there's still some ability to add even more strength to him. I think you look at, you know, the testing numbers that he has. I think you look at how quick he is, the athleticism that he has, and as he continues to get stronger and as he continues to put on weight to really withstand college offensive lineman, I think the sky's the limit there. And I love the fact that, you know, that MMA background is there, because a lot of those little things that can really separate elite defensive linemen from good defensive linemen is in the little details that you sometimes learn in MMA. And that is the quickness with the hands and the ability to use your hands and, you know, just the ability to strike. And I think that, you know, when you look at this class, there's 10 players in the top 10. Of those 10, 5 are defensive linemen, and there's 2 defensive tackles, a couple defensive end. We know the premium that is placed on defensive linemen. You look at our top 20, or our top 2 players in the 24/7 a year ago. They were Corey Foreman and JT Tuimoloau, defensive linemen. So you look at the premium that's placed on them, and then you get a guy like Gabriel Brownlow Dindy, who could play inside. He could play a 3-tech. He can be an outside guy, but he's got so much versatility. And I think it's just a matter of what his body does at the next level. You just want to get him on that defensive line.
Yeah, man. And speaking of the next level, I like where Clemson's at with him. I like where Oklahoma's at with him. And I like where Texas A&M's at with him now, but he's going to take his time through the process. A couple more quick risers before I let you go, Brandon. Hero Canoe, defensive lineman from out west. David Bailey, an outside linebacker from out west. And then Hunter Erb, an offensive tackle committed to the Aggies from the Lone Star State.
Hunter Erb is a guy that, you know, got good length. He's got great arms. I think he's got, you know, that wingspan to be a true tackle. One of the best offensive linemen, not just in the state of Texas, but really nationally this year, making a huge jump. I think almost 100 spots is what his move up the rankings are. And I think that, you know, you look at what his size is, you could see a guy that's already college ready. And it seems like Texas A&M has had guys like that for like the last 10, 12 years, whether it was the Matthews brothers. You know, they've had their share of offensive linemen that came in with good college-ready size to be able to play right away. You know, we've talked in years past about how there's been kind of a dip in 300-plus pounders as high schoolers in their first-round drafting, but then there's also kind of a different type of 300-pounder. The guys that are 300 pounds but room to put on more, where it's not a sloppy 300. And that's what I think Hunter Erb is. I think he's an athletic 300-plus pounder. You know, he's got a great punch. He can run block. He can pass protect. And a player that I really like as an offensive lineman, having watched all the offensive linemen in this class in the top 247, he's the guy that I'm really excited to see what he does in Jimbo Fisher's time at Texas A&M. You look back at kind of the end of his time at Florida State, and there were some questions about the offensive line. I think his offensive line that he's recruited at Texas A&M have been great, and I think Hunter Erb is going to be a guy that will be an impact player. Then you go back out to the West Coast, and we talked about the Trinity League earlier with Bryce Young and DJ Uiagalelei, and you got a player that comes from Bryce Young's school, David Bailey. In fact, if it weren't for Bryce Young's dad, Craig, half of us wouldn't even know that David Bailey was getting recruited. He's got no social media footprint, no Twitter, no Instagram. He's the son of doctors and lawyers. He's got major academic strengths. I mean, he's got an Ivy League background in his family, and he just keeps a low profile, but then you watch him on the field and he keeps anything but a low profile. You look at how talented that modern day defense is with Rajon Davis, who's a top 100 guy, Damani Jackson, a top 50 guy, and so much other talent. And David Bailey's kind of the straw that stirs the drink. And he's been terrific the last couple of weeks of the season, in the shortened season, out west, at modern day, staying in the Trinity League. Another player who's kind of a relative newcomer to the game of football, Hero Canoe. He comes from Santa Margarita High School in Southern California, but he's originally from Germany. He actually is at the same school that Maurice Himes, who's from Germany, going to the University of Washington's at, and that's what attracted him to Santa Margarita. But he's had an even bigger jump. Maurice Himes didn't play a varsity football game until about 6 weeks ago. He had to play JV once he transferred. Hero Canoe comes out, plays varsity as a junior, and instantly was probably the best defensive lineman in the very good Trinity League. And you see the soccer background, you see the athleticism, the strength, and this is a guy who is still very, very new to football. So when he really figures out what he's doing football-wise, the sky's the limit for him too. And it's exciting to see some of these players coming from Europe, coming to the US to explore a game that's still relatively new in Europe, and then take to it that quickly, where they got 20 plus offers in just a 4 or 5 week season of film.
Thank you, Brandon Huffman. Thank you all for tuning into the Whip Around this week. We'll be back next week to talk more recruiting.